Turn that true. We're good to go. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I'm Peter Lohan. I'm the director of the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. I want to welcome you to the University of Toronto, which is on, of course, the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit. And we're really grateful to be able to continue to live and work here on the traditional site of Tidal Creek. We're joined today by Scott Aitchison, who is Member of Parliament for Parry Sound Muskoka, is, of course, a leadership candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada, has agreed to come here today to talk to us about his vision for Canada and the world and for foreign policy. So I just want to tell you a little bit about the order of operations. I'm going to invite Scott to the Munk podium here to say a few words about his views on these issues, and then we'll engage in a conversation. I've got lots of questions written down for him. I'd encourage you to pose questions as well. You can write them on cards that'll get distributed, and I'll sort through them and add them to the discussion as we do that. And for those of you who are online, you can submit your questions through the Q&A function, and they'll get to me as well. So we have an hour. Time is of the essence. So I just want to ask you to join me in welcoming to the podium Scott Aitchison. Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter, for that introduction, and welcome me to the Munk School. I keep telling people I'm, just a small town mayor from Huntsville, and here I am at the Munk School now. So I feel pretty special to be here. Thank you for having me. And I have to say, the power of this place to connect leaders and doers and thinkers in addressing the challenges of our time is an asset not just to Toronto and to Canada, but for the efforts to protect and advance democratic governance around the world. So thank you, all of you, for being here today, and to those joining online. I am interested in your questions after my few remarks, but I want to just sort of share a little bit and reflect a bit on the moment that we're living in first. I entered this leadership race because I see a country that is not living up to its potential. There's an old adage that foreign policy does not win elections. But for too long, our leaders here in Canada have viewed foreign policy, national defense, and security as more of an afterthought rather than a core responsibility of the federal government. One of the motivations of Confederation, in fact, was to make this federal government in Canada to open new trade markets for Canadian goods around the world. And in more contemporary times, of course, the original intent of the TPP trade agreement, when President Obama and Prime Minister Harper and other leaders started those negotiations, was not only to increase prosperity in the Asia Pacific for the member countries, but also to reinforce global peace and security with the rising threats we see from an increasingly belligerent China. So when I talk about foreign policy and defense and the need for real leadership in Canada, this is not some abstract or secondary policy issue. This is fundamental responsibility of the federal government that not only keeps Canadians safe and secure at home, but helps to create new wealth and prosperity while advancing global economic growth that furthers peace and democratic governance around the world. And with this in mind, I want to take a moment just to share some ideas on how we can bring real leadership to Ottawa to address these challenges in a new way that earns the trust of Canadians and strengthens our society to increase peace and prosperity. The war in Ukraine has further exposed just how bare our military cupboards are here in Canada, and how incapable Canada is of mounting a serious response to the global challenges of today. So 3 priorities must guide a renewed vision for Canada. 1, keep Canadians safe and secure. 2, advance economic opportunities. And 3, advance human rights and democratic governance around the world. Today's women and men in Canada's armed forces, they deserve better. For too long, Canada has neglected to resource our forces with the personnel and equipment they need to keep Canadians safe. 7 years after canceling the purchase of F-35s when he came to power, Justin Trudeau is finally doing the right thing and buying new fighter jets for our Air Force. But that's not enough. Our allies are literally forming new alliances without us because Canada today is an unreliable partner on the world stage. Like so much we see with this government, they want credit for saying the right things, but do very little of the work to get things done. Canada needs to meet its commitments to our NATO allies and spend 2% of our GDP to build up Canada's armed forces. But this is not just about spending. We need to look at the operational strategy of our armed forces and make sure that they are capable of moving with agility to get the equipment and the personnel they need to keep us safe while also responding to the threats of the 21st century. Our allies need to be able to believe that when Canada says it's going to do something on the world stage, we can and will follow through. A decades-long procurement process to build and deliver nothing is the wrong approach. We need action backed by investment that takes the challenges of the world seriously. We need to end the problems of procurement and the cross-government finger-pointing to correct it. So let's work together and be honest about what we can and cannot do. Arctic sovereignty, integrated defense capabilities, and modern equipment for our armed forces must be what Canada commits to and delivers. Set the right policies, budget the right amount, and step by step, we will build back up our armed forces capable of keeping Canada safe and increasing our power around the world. Which brings me to foreign affairs. Our foreign policy is adrift, and the resources we do dedicate to it are spread too thin to be effective in their pursuits. And while it may be no surprise that diplomats tiptoe around Canada's ineffective ways and actions, but the actions of our allies and partners, it speaks louder than their words. We know there are threats in this world. Russia is a threat to global security. Afghanistan is once again ruled by the Taliban. China is using its military and economic might to sow instability and undermine global security in the Asia-Pacific region, while also engaging in some of the most egregious human rights violations we see in the world today. And while I am glad that this government has finally banned Huawei from our 5G networks, as a result of their dithering and delays, my cabinet will also work with security experts to review any security threats this delay has caused and move swiftly to address them. As Prime Minister, I will consult with our partners to determine how Canada can best contribute and join the new AUKUS alliance formed by the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia. Our national defense, our security agencies, and foreign policy must respond to these threats and seek to enhance global security. Which brings me to the economy and global trade. For too long, Canada's approach to global trade has been short-sighted and rarely looked beyond our borders to the south and our American friends. The offshoring of the 90s has real consequences, and we are now realizing the security threat of stability and supply chains is clearly in need of correction. Canada cannot afford to remain complacent if we are going to continue to be one of the most prosperous nations on earth. So, what can we do to start? We can get more Canadian energy to global markets. Oil, natural gas, and nuclear technology can meet the world's energy needs, allow Canadians to prosper, and reduce global emissions causing climate change. Beyond energy, as Prime Minister, I will work to open new markets to Canadian products and services. It's one of the reasons I will scrap Pierre Trudeau's supply management system and open up more access to global markets for Canadian products. It's also why my government will support Taiwan's bid to join the CPTPP agreement to expand trade opportunities in the Asia-Pacific. Not only will it create more economic opportunities for Canadian businesses in the Asia-Pacific, it will support a country whose security is threatened by China. And working with our allies and trade partners, we can open more markets to Canadian products and advance our values and security interests in tandem. Which brings me to the importance of human rights and democratic governance. Two countries come top of mind when I think of allies and trade partners who face extraordinary threats to their existence: Israel and Taiwan. Israel is one of the freest countries in the world and the sole stable democracy in the Middle East. It was created following the horrors of World War II to return Jewish people to their ancestral home, and in doing so, to create a safe haven for the Jewish people fleeing the scourge of anti-Semitism that continues to threaten Jews around the world today. Today, Israel is a vibrant society with a rich culture and economic prosperity. But Israel continues to be threatened, and Canada must recommit to standing with our ally. As Prime Minister, Canada's embassy will rightfully be moved to Israel's capital in Jerusalem. We will also partner with our allies with a renewed commitment to defense to ensure we are countering Iran's ongoing threat to annihilate the world's sole Jewish state and counter the very real and ongoing threats of terrorism that Israelis face every day. which brings me to Taiwan. Under Canada's One China policy, Canada does not recognize Taiwan as a sovereign state and does not maintain official government-to-government relations with Taipei. It is distinct from Beijing's One China principle, which for decades has upheld an ideal that after Mao's communist revolution, Taiwan could one day be unified with the mainland under the Chinese Communist Party. For the better part of 50 years, Canada's and Western foreign policy was premised on the basis that increased trade and prosperity with China would lead to greater adherence to human rights and liberalization of communism's harsh edges. We were wrong. Taiwan today is a sovereign, democratic country, a beacon of openness and democracy with respect for human rights, and a case study in the benefits of a market-based economy open to trading with the world. It's time for Canada to recognize this reality. We can establish proper diplomatic relations in Taiwan and support greater integration at Taiwan's request to join the World Health Organization, obtain observer status at Interpol, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. While both countries are small, they are powerful symbols in advancing human rights and democratic governance and cannot be understated. These are the main priorities Canada must advance to keep Canadians secure and create more economic opportunity, advance human rights and democratic governance around the world. I believe we are capable of being and doing so much more. And throughout this campaign to lead the Conservative Party, I have been inviting people to join me to make this a reality. We can bring a new approach to Ottawa that delivers results for the people and unites Canadians while bringing the leadership required to seriously address the challenges of our time. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today and to share some thoughts, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was, by the standards of Canadian foreign policy, relatively bold. So let's ask some questions about this. I want to talk about Ukraine first, if you don't mind. Yeah. And then there are particular things you brought up that we should really get into, okay. And I know you'd love to. What should Canada be doing in Ukraine right now and around Ukraine that it's not already doing?
Well, I think that this speaks to the issue that I addressed with in terms of how we are not really a reliable partner with our NATO allies. Canada cannot really do anything alone. We need to be working with our NATO allies in Ukraine, but at the same time, without being a reliable partner, whatever Canada advances or tries to advocate for on behalf of Ukraine with NATO, if we can't back it up with action, there's not much more we can do. And so I would say that at this point, we're probably doing all we can do because we've neglected, our responsibilities with NATO pretty dramatically for the last several years.
So let's think about this as a bit of a case, because you've got, suppose you're prime minister 6 months from now or 12 months from now. There's no magic wand to get us to 2%. Right. I mean, part of the problem with what we're saying to Ukraine is that the armaments are so old they're not of much use. Yeah. Because our allies have they've all updated their software and we haven't. So and there's only so much we can offer there. We can't get to 2% on our budget very quickly. So realistically, not pragmatically, what would you do over a 4-year period that would, if this conflict's going to go on for some time, how would things look different 2-3 years down the road? Yeah,
it's important to start the process. You're absolutely right. I mean, even if we had the money right now, 2% of GDP spending on our armed forces, we don't have the people. And this is part of the other issue that we have in our services is that we need more young Canadians to see it as an opportunity, and we need them to be proud to join the services. And so there's a massive recruitment that would have to take place. We obviously would need to work up to the 2%, and it would probably take us a few years to get there. But it's not just buying planes or equipment; it's about attracting people.
Yeah, it seems to me that one thing which you've noted is I want to talk about the Arctic, and I want to relate it to Ukraine in a couple of ways. But one way is obviously that as you're rolling out new spending and as you're rolling out new kind of foreign policy initiatives, you can be captured by what's going on in other parts of the world. We can be trying to assert Arctic sovereignty, and we can't do both of those things to maximum effect at the same time. So where do the priorities come? Would they come for your government in terms of making contributions to places like Ukraine or other places where conflict is broiling versus sort of proactively trying to build out our sovereignty up north?
Well, and I think this is where a review of our whole strategy comes into play. We need to have I think a much broader discussion with Canadians about what they see as our top priority. Obviously Arctic sovereignty, we've talked a lot about Arctic sovereignty, and we've talked a lot about making investments. The Harper government kind of started that process, but the Arctic is becoming more and more open. And so to neglect it, neglects our sovereignty. And the primary responsibility of our armed forces has to be protect our borders. And so, my thinking is that, obviously that would be a key priority. But this is also an issue that, in terms of our NATO relationships, NATO is not just about the safety and security of Europe, it's about the safety and security of all partners. And so I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
So how do we assert our sovereignty in the Arctic when the Americans aren't keen to recognize it?
Well, I think part of the reason they're not keen to recognize it is because we have never been keen to demonstrate it. If we just sort of continue to rely upon the good graces of the United States to, ultimately provide security for Canadians, then we're not a reliable partner. And so I don't think you just ignore America's interests. You have to work collaboratively with our allies, but a presence is at least a start.
Let's go back to Ukraine for a second. So obviously there's limits on how much we can send them in terms of arms. Your Prime Minister, two questions. Would you be sending them more in terms of money? That's the first one. Actually, three questions. More in terms of money. What would you do on sending back turbines to Germany and other things which are going to come up like this, because sanctions are hard to impose? And I'll come to a third one in a second.
In terms of how much money we're sending to Ukraine, there's probably always more we could do. I think it's important to obviously address the needs that Ukraine specifically has asked for. I had a veteran in my community reach out to me asking for some assistance to get some bunker gear, fire equipment to Ukraine, because there's a number of fire departments across Canada that had collected this gear, and of course it's needed. I reached out to the Minister of Defense and asked if we could sort of help out with this, and we got turned down because it's not a specific request of the Ukrainian government. And so we're looking at other ways to help. But I think it is important to address their requests specifically. I don't know exactly what those are, but I think it's important to work in lockstep with them. Sorry, the next part of your question.
Well, let's go back to this one for a second, because this is kind of a question of leadership in some sense, right? That from my vantage point, the position that Ukraine has itself in, it's a difficult one. Is that it needs continued engagement and attention on what's going on there, and you can see the fatigue's already setting in. That the public is already moving on to other things.
Less interested. Yeah,
we've got a hard time imagining this is going to go on for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah,
and yet you've got people in your community who want to, by their own efforts, contribute to the fight for self-determination in Ukraine, right? Yeah. Is there something that you'd bring to leadership that would make it possible to kind of sustain those types of, those alliances at the level of attention and commitment that this government's lacking? Yeah,
I think there are other examples where governments have done this, where the federal government will match contributions of Canadians to various different areas, whether it's a natural disaster. And I just see this as another opportunity for our government to partner with Canadians who feel passionate and have an ambition to assist. It seems like a real classic opportunity, and yet this government politely turned me down. So this is, and if you want to talk about leadership, this is another example where I'm like, I've stopped wasting my time with the Minister of National Defense, and I'm now working with Firefighters Without Borders because they want to help. So we'll find other ways.
On sanctions to Russia, we've got this, and there's an interesting example that's come up this week, right? About Canada wants to service some turbines for Siemens, German company, that's going to then put them back into the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. The view of the Ukrainians is that this is a violation of sanctions in spirit, if not in the law. And I think the view of the Canadian government is it's a transaction with a German company. I wonder if you have a view on that, but I also just wonder more generally if you think that we should be upping sanctions, or should they be increasing kind of geometrically, or are we kind of doing all we can there?
Yeah. So I'll speak specifically about these turbines, and so this is what I'll say about the turbines is that is that none of these decisions are, most of them are not very simple yes or no answers. And so these turbines, I think there's a very real concern in Germany that if they don't have some fuel from Russia, that there's potential for their economy to literally collapse this winter, and that would have massive, domino effect across Europe and really around the world. And so, while not a perfect decision, we find ourselves in this position in large part because of this government's energy policy in this country. Canada should be in a position to fill the gap in Eastern Europe, but we're not, because we've got a government that has been ashamed of our position as a resource superpower, and have chosen politics over good energy and climate policy. And so I would say if I had been the prime minister for the last 7 years, we wouldn't be in this position where we had to send these turbines back. We would be shipping more Canadian energy to fill the gap.
Yeah, and it's another one of these things which is not an overnight thing, I guess, right? Because it takes a long time to get ourselves to the capacity to send the bubble ships over the Atlantic with natural gas. You're in the course of a leadership race, obviously. There's 5 of you in this 4?
Down to 5.
There's 5 of you in this race, of course. And it's been a very entertaining race to watch, and it's
That's one way to describe
and
it.
I don't mean that pejoratively. People are engaged and they should be engaged, yes. Right? So I wanted to talk about a bit of not the partisan angle of this, but sort of the conservative angle of this. Sure. You're a member of the Conservative Party. Do you think that there are elements of a conservative foreign policy that you share across all the candidates in your party, or is there not such a thing?
Well, I literally, other candidates have not talked much about foreign policy, and so I'm not really sure. I haven't spent much time actually, focusing on what they have been saying. I think that it is, it's certainly conservative policy generally to have a more principled, stance on foreign affairs. I think about, Prime Minister Harper and his, absolutely rock solid stance in support of Israel. I think that was a very principled stand, and it was the right one. I think, in terms of, development aid and assistance to different countries, there was an attempt there to focus more of that assistance in our hemisphere, so that, there was whether that was right or wrong, it was a principled approach to sort of, we don't have huge resources in the global scheme of things in that department, so focus it where you maybe can do the most good. So I think, conservative foreign policy has tended to be principled, and I think maybe one of the best examples ever might be Brian Mulroney and his approach to the world. I mean, he was a prime minister that understood the power of personal relationships with other world leaders. I'm convinced that Nelson Mandela probably would have died in prison if it wasn't for Brian Mulroney's leadership on the world stage. That's principled leadership. And there's no reason why Canada can't be that again.
Yeah, and that tracks itself all the way back to Diefenbaker opposing apartheid at the same time. So then let's bring this into the context then of, I want to come back to your point about focused foreign policy and focused aid, but I'm wondering I want to talk about, you put really 2 actually quite controversial things. You said them quietly, but you put 2 very controversial things on the table. One is moving the Canadian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which of course the state of Israel recognizes as the capital of the country, obviously, though most embassies are in Tel Aviv, and recognizing diplomatically and as an independent country, Taiwan. Let's start with Israel. What does it change for Israel? How does it make Israelis safer if we move the capital from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem?
I think it's a powerful message to one of our most important allies that Canada stands with them, and that we see them as obviously a legitimate and important democratic and vibrant nation in a very dangerous part of the world, and that we will always stand with them. It doesn't negate the importance of a 2-state solution, but Israel is a vibrant, pluralistic society and an important democracy that we need to stand with. And I just think it sends a very powerful message to our friends there.
Yeah. Do you worry that as the world tries to find its way to a 2-state solution, that it actually would injure Canada's ability to talk to other states that are around Israel to persuade them?
No, yeah. I don't. I don't, because I think that as you make moves like this, you continue to engage with other states around the region. I mean, we can't pull back and focus just on ourselves. We need to have, I think, dialogue and discussions with all nations, and it needs to be principled. And I think that by continuing to have that dialogue, I mean, this speaks to what I've been talking about in our conservative movement and our conservative caucus all along through this leadership. We have to be talking to each other as a conservative movement, and the fact of the matter is we're not, and there's division. And so that dialogue is crucially important for our Conservative Party to build unity. And I think it holds true for our relationships around the world. We need to continue the dialogue.
And what are the costs of, there aren't kind of readily apparent costs to recognizing Tel Aviv, or recognizing Jerusalem, sorry, as the capital of Israel. There are likely costs to recognition of Taiwan. We should expect that the Chinese would pull back on trade. Yep. I mean, they throttle us on pork and on canola just over cell phone networks, right? And over and rest. Recognition of a country that they view as a part of them, part of the country, would surely lead to some disruption of trade, right? How much is worth it?
Well, I think that this is actually an opportunity for Canada to show leadership with other Western allies. I mean, you look at what is going on now. The Vice President of the European Union is going to visit. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, is going to visit. Some of the statements that President Biden has made. If we work with our Western allies together on this, then China needs us. As much as we need China in terms of our global economy, and so I think that this is just an opportunity for Canada to lead and to lead with our allies in getting to a point where we recognize Taiwan for what it truly is. Do you think the world's reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine has changed China's view of the cost of asserting their independence or their control over Taiwan? I think it has. I think that the Chinese government is watching very cautiously what's going on between Russia and Ukraine right now. Yeah, it seems to me that that's what really ups the stakes in Ukraine, right? That holding the line on sanctions and making sure that it's a sustained effort, kind of a sustained set of sanctions for a long time against Russia is what sends the credibility signal, right? And, there are big costs to folding. That's my opinion on Ukraine. But there is, but this is again one of the reasons why it's so important for us to work with our allies and have a consistent approach, and to be working in the example of Ukraine, working with our NATO allies and making sure that we are all consistent in that approach. So. Yeah, how do we find our way? How do we find our way into those alliances between the U.S., the UK, and Australia? How do we find our way into the Quad if we can? I mean, I think you've said some of the things you think will do it, right? But is there a silver bullet? Yeah, I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it's a sustained demonstration that we are actually prepared to live up to the commitments that we need to live up to. If we're not a reliable partner, then we're not a reliable partner. I mean, one of the reasons why, AUKUS exists and they're talking, about, we're getting left out is what it comes down to by our traditional allies because of things like taking forever to remove Huawei from our 5G networks. Every one of our allies, in terms of, security has already done it. And so we're not reliable. And so this is just a classic example of a government that has dithered and left us in a position where we're kind of on our own. And so I think that like AUKUS, the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, they would welcome us with open arms if they knew that we were prepared to be a reliable ally. Yeah. So then what are the first 2-3 things you do as Prime Minister? Where do you go? What are the 2-3 things that you change right away? Sometimes these are what someone gets into office and immediately they want to send a signal for how they're different. What do you do? Well, I mentioned in my comments as I opened here about the importance of doing a thorough review of any security threats that exist today because of taking forever to remove Huawei from our 5G networks as an important first step, but also making some pretty clear statements to the world that we intend to meet our obligations to NATO, that we intend to meet our obligations in security and with our partners, and that we aim to be a reliable partner. And I think you make those statements, you make those moves early, and you visit the countries that we aim to be a reliable partner to again. Yeah.
Let's talk about two other parts of the world, Latin America, which you spoke about a little bit, the Harper foreign policy. There's a question here, which is, it's a mixed assertion. Canada, which is correct, Canada isn't using its influence to face down dictatorships in Latin America. Would your government have a different approach?
I haven't given much thought to Latin America. I've been to Latin America a few times visiting, but I think, if we're going to have a principled stance on democratic governance around the world, then we have to have a principled stance. It's a curious feature of Canadian foreign policy in a sense, right? That we have a really remarkable trading partnership with Mexico, with the United States. It enriches our country. It's responsible for 3 million of 20-some million jobs in this country, but we don't have a North American foreign policy. Yeah. We don't think of ourselves as being part of that as being part of that piece, right? Talk about how much more you would do on trade with the U.S. You're the only candidate. I want to congratulate you on this. I think maybe Roman Barber as well, but who's been willing to come out and say that Canadians shouldn't pay egregiously high prices for milk, and that we should shut down supply management. Yeah. Why do you think that? Is that a foreign policy issue? It's also an economic issue, frankly. I mean, we think back to one of the reasons why the provinces came together and created this federal government in the first place. One of the reasons was to help create markets and establish markets for Canadian products in the world. And of course, at that time, this was mostly agriculture. Let's not kid ourselves. And so I just see this not just as an important move to generate some competition in the dairy industry to make food cheaper for Canadians who literally are struggling to put food on the table with the inflation and the high costs of everything, but it is also about small c conservative economic policy. This is not free market by any stretch of the imagination. And our farmers, the dairy farmers in this country are some of the best in the world. And it's criminal to me that in some circumstances, because they, met their quota and have more milk, they have to pour it down the drain. I know that our farmers in this country can compete in the world. And then we need to give them the opportunity to do that. And this is the point. Obviously you don't come into office and immediately snap your fingers and eliminate the quota system. It's expensive. And so I think, collaboration with the dairy industry and the farmers and the transition to helping build those and create those new markets around the world, it will take some time to do and it will cost some money, but it's also being done to them. Every time we look at a new trade agreement, NAFTA was, I don't know what they call it now, but the renegotiation. It's got 3 different names depending on where you live. Exactly. Yeah. But they chip away a little bit at the quota system, and there's compensation paid to dairy farmers from the federal government. And so, I think it's important not just for us to do this because it's the right policy. I think it's going to get done to farmers, and we need to be proactive on this to make sure that there is a thriving dairy industry in this country. And I think the best way to do that is to make sure that they have markets around the world. I give the example of New Zealand, a country of just over 5 million people, exported $17 billion worth of dairy products around the world last year. We exported 370 million. I know we can do better. Yeah. And there's a very good argument to be made that actually the kind of fear of confronting supply management is what kept us from extracting more from NAFTA. Yeah. That last round of negotiations was extremely risky, and that we were putting a whole bunch on the table for only really a slightly altered agreement, right? And one of the log jams that kept us from having a much more comprehensive agreement was our unwillingness to break up our system of supply management. Yeah. So Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, used to say that Europe didn't have its phone connected yet, right? So you could never get in touch with them when it came to foreign policy, but they plugged it in the last few months. So good for them, or they charged it up, or whatever the analogy is now. But Europe's kind of back in the mix, right? And it's been pretty impressive how open Europeans have been to accepting 3-4 million Ukrainians who have left the country. And at the level of citizens in Europe, they've been pretty willing to support the effort in Ukraine. What should Canada be doing in Europe? Should we be doing more on trade? Should we go all the way to having much more extensive labor mobility with Europe? Yeah, absolutely we should. And I think that the main reason we don't is, again, because of things like supply management. We continue to, wall ourselves off by, protecting a decades old system that, just protects the system. And it actually closes us off to greater opportunities, not just in the dairy industry, but across our economy. I speak about our energy policy. has been the absence of real policy for the last 7 years. Europe needs more of what Canada has to offer. And so we absolutely should, build greater relationships and open up, more trade. Stephen Harper did a lot of great work to, create more trade agreements, particularly with the European Union. And of course, now we're, working on, an updated agreement so that we have one with the UK as well. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are a trading nation. If we don't trade, we don't thrive at all.
Yeah, dozens and dozens of agreements.
Yeah.
Under the Harper government. How far should it go? I mean, we've talked about trade and in a sense services. Let's talk about labor. How far should we go to allow for labor mobility across the Canada-U.S. border? How far should we go with Europe? What are your views on this? Because it implies, competition for labor.
Yeah, no, and I'm a big believer in this, and one of the reasons I am is because of the work that I did under when Aaron O'Toole was our leader on the CANZAC file. This is sort of greater, cooperation amongst Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand. One of the big crucial elements of that is labor mobility, and one of the challenges we have in this country for that part of the agreement is, of course, provincial jurisdiction. And so, we have a bit of a challenge in this country to just sort of say, yeah, well, labor mobility across our countries when we have to bring the provinces on board with these issues. So that's going to take a lot of heavy lifting to make sure that, the professional agencies that exist in each province, we can find, some sort of coordinating effort amongst them. I give examples. I was a doctor in my home community of Huntsville who's just about to retire. He's a surgeon, and he is a pretty conscious guy. He would like to. He always did like locums to assist in underserviced parts of the country, and he was trying to do a couple of weeks in the Northwest Territories of the Yukon. I can't remember which one it was, but there was one surgeon in the territory, and she needed a break. She was looking to go for a couple of weeks holiday, and it took months and months and months to get the surgeon from Huntsville approved by the government there to work and to cover them. So they had a surgeon for those 2 weeks. And finally, the surgeon in the Yukon said, I'm leaving. So either you get it done or you won't have a surgeon, right? Yes. I mean, the fact that kind of difficulty exists when we're just trying to help each other out in this in our own country is a level of complication that we need to address, but it's going to take collaboration with the provinces. So.
Yeah, but do you think you bust through it by having a lot? I mean, so for example, one of your opponents, Mr. Poilievre, has said that one thing he would commit to is trying to, basically cut accreditation times for doctors and for professionals by 80% or something like that, right? He's gonna fast track it. Is it possible, right? And do we use labor agreements to try to force this through?
It is possible, but it's not possible to dictate to the provinces that this is how it's going to be. So I don't know what Mr. Poilievre's plan is, but it does take collaboration. You do have to work with the provinces. It's important to remember that the provinces are not some subservient level of government to the federal government. That they are, they have different responsibilities, but are partners in confederation. One doesn't work for the other, and so there is a lot of work that needs to be done at the federal level to change the relationship that exists between Canada and the provinces. And I could get into that at great length on things like healthcare and the Canada Health Act and what we need to do to shore up our healthcare system. But we're here to talk about other things. So,
well, I want to tie it into foreign policy in a sec. So I'll give you the chance in a sense, right? So here are two big problems we have in Canada. We have a long-term labor shortage.
Yep.
I think we all agree that we're too old a country. We don't have enough young people,
mm-hmm.
and we've got nowhere to live. Housing is deeply expensive.
Yep.
Even in places like Huntsville and North Bay, where we're from,
yes.
It's expensive to buy houses now. It's God's country, so it should be, but it's catching up finally. But nonetheless, it's expensive to house people. We're not building houses fast enough, and we have a labor shortage. And one way that we've, I think, as a country, decided that we're going to solve this is by having actually comparatively quite remarkably high levels of immigration.
Mm-hmm.
We let in north of 400,000 people last year, more than anyone else in the G7 in absolute terms. How do we square those? How do we square those circles, right? And are you a prime minister who would support levels of immigration that high? And then how do you sustain it?
The short answer is yes, I would. We need more people. And part of the reason we have, a housing shortage in this country is because of the lack of skilled trades. And so we need an immigration policy, not just that welcomes more Canadians in general, but actually works very closely with the provinces and with industry to determine, what skills we need desperately in this country. And to be targeted and very focused in making sure that we welcome new Canadians that have the skills that we desperately need. And one of those areas is in construction and housing. And so I know a lot of people sort of think that the only way we're going to solve the housing crisis if we reduce immigration numbers, but in fact it's quite the opposite. We need more people to help build those homes. We need more people to help, in all sectors of our economy. Every industry in this country right now is looking for people. We need more Canadians, and I can leave it at that.
No, I want to hear more about this. I mean, where should these Canadians be coming from? Who should we be taking? I mean, should we be continuing with the immigration system that we've got? Should we have a point system with family reunification? Do we have the mix right? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't, propose that I'm an expert on the fine details of our policy. I just know that we need more. We need to be growing as a country if we're going to keep up and if we're going to continue to grow our economy. And so, a review of how we're doing and where we're looking for people, I think is important. But again, it's important to work with the provinces to focus on the skills that we desperately need. And that's really the crux of it. We need more Canadians. And I would say too that, at the beginning of the pandemic, it's almost like, what's happened in our supply chains, right? I mean, there were very few people that came to this country in the early days of the pandemic because everyone shut their borders down, right? And that's having a ripple effect in our economy, much like, disruptions in supply chains are going to continue to have to work the kinks out of that for the next, for the next foreseeable future anyhow. And I think it's the same thing that's going on in terms of our immigration. People want to come here because opportunity abounds. And if we want to continue to grow this country, we want to continue to prosper, we need more Canadians.
Yeah, let me ask you another question about immigration that relates to foreign policy in some sense. So there's a couple ways to come with this question, but here's one. One reason why Canada cares a lot about Ukraine is because we've got the world's second largest Ukrainian population outside of Ukraine. Yep. 1.3 million Canadians of Ukrainian heritage. Pretty remarkable, actually. Yeah, it is. When you think about it. And that, there's a natural then concern about Ukraine. We're a country where a lot of Canadians care about the politics of other places a lot. And I'm sure you confront this in a leadership race as you're going around the country, meeting different communities, right? Mm-hmm. How do political leaders deal with those, with the challenges, I'm going to say, of diasporic politics? Just give you a couple of examples. There's been a lot of concern in certain Indo-Canadian communities about farm reform laws in India. Nothing to do with Canada, but there's concern about it there, right? We've got a lot of Canadians who came from Hong Kong in the late 1970s, early 1980s, who are very worried about what's happening in Hong Kong, right? And the list goes on and on. Nothing wrong with this in particular, but how do you, as a prime minister, think about foreign policy in a country where a lot of people have very particular concerns about different parts of the world, and they want to see parties act on those?
That's a really good question.
I don't know. I think about this one all the time, so I was hoping you could give me an answer.
That's fair. Yeah. I may not give you a really well thought out answer because I haven't given a lot of thought to that. But I will say this: my observation has been that instead of having a principled stand on issues that exist in various different countries, our politics has tended to play political games on these issues, and focus on what maybe the community in Canada thinks what they care about most. And so I would just say it's important to come back to stop, not playing politics with these issues, but having a principled stand on issues. And I think being honest with, all communities that, if there are some circumstances in some other countries that, really does not have an impact on Canada. And if it really is a matter of, public policy, let's say in a democratic country where, there's a democratic process going on, then I think it's important for Canada to respect that as well, and not just play political games.
Let's rapid fire through a few of these because there's some good ones here. Okay. All right. I'm gonna ask you the population of Jordan. Okay, no, here we go. So someone's saying, for me, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Macau, similar are all in similar situations vis-a-vis China.
Right.
Why does the whole world pay attention to Taiwan only? Why don't we apply the same approach to Hong Kong and to Macau?
Well, I guess that the circumstances are a little bit different in Taiwan than they are in Macau and Hong Kong, and that's probably the biggest reason why. And yeah, I guess I can't think of anything else other than that.
It's a pretty good answer. Regarding, here's a good one about your party. Actually, I think it's we'll take it just a little bit away from foreign policy, but I think you'll like it. There's rising political polarity in Canada. So how do you feel about the future of Canada's Conservatives? And will we see more conflicts and division, or will modern politics be back in play?
Well, I think that our Conservative Party and really in some ways our country is at a bit of a crossroads right now. I think that, as I've said many times in this campaign, I entered federal politics from municipal politics. I literally grew up, as I say, I grew up on the front page of the local newspaper in Huntsville. I started when I was 21 and town council in Huntsville and regional government in Muskoka, finishing up as the mayor. And, what I learned at that level of politics is that number one, you are closest to the people and that your job is to solve problems. And sometimes that's something like a culvert at the end of their driveway, and sometimes it's a bigger issue. But your job is to solve problems. And when I got to Ottawa, I was instantly dismayed by the seeming lack of interest in focusing on real problems and the interest more in attacking, whether it was our side attacking Liberals or the Liberals attacking us. I think most Canadians are familiar with the House of Commons based on what they see during question period, which is a ridiculous theater right now. It seems to me like too many members of Parliament are focused on getting great click results on their Twitter feed as opposed to solving problems. And so I think that we are at a crossroads because I think that our politics overall, Liberals and Conservative, the political operatives have used the differences of opinion that exist between us and exacerbated those and used them to sow division just to win elections. That's what our politics, it's become kind of this zero-sum game. And I really do believe that Canadians are tired of that. Whether they can define what it is they're tired about it, I wouldn't know, but I think that what Canadians are looking for is real leadership that actually seeks to solve the problems they face every single day, and leadership that focuses on those things that unite us, that bring us together, because there's far more that unites Canadians than divides us. My whole approach in this leadership race and my whole approach in my experience in government, whether it's municipal or federal, has been to offer ideas and solutions to problems, policy, and not attack my opponents, whether they be a Liberal or another leadership contestant. As I've said a few times, I never imagined that behaving like an adult would make me stand out in a crowd, but it seems to have done so in this election. So, but there are deeper differerences, and it's quite apparent. But there are deeper differences that go beyond style, right? There's some group within your party. I don't think they're very large. But there's some group within your party that really thinks that global institutions are somehow irredeemably corrupt or something, right? And that there's conspiracies lurking out there that are pulling the strings of Justin Trudeau or whatever. I mean, and some of this stuff I think seems pretty fanciful, and you understand where the beliefs come from, but if they don't bear themselves out, that matters. But how much of this is a concern, right? That some of the more let's phrase the question a bit better for you, which is you've got a party that's got a history of signing international trade agreements, working positively within the UN on things like apartheid, right? Working positively within the Commonwealth on things like apartheid, dealing with environmental issues at a regional, if not a global level. Canada's Conservatives have a track record of some success in foreign policy in this. And then there's a growing body that thinks that global institutions are irredeemably corrupted, if not a source of conspiracy, right? Yeah. How do you deal with this? Well, again, I've spoken a lot about this in terms of our caucus in Ottawa, and I guess more broadly our movement. But what's missing in Ottawa is real leadership. I've said before, you know, there are too many people in leadership positions in Ottawa that I don't think understand what leadership is. And so I believe fundamentally, and I did this as a mayor, that if I'm the leader of our party, I'm the leader of a team. And that team, has to be part of something. They have to feel like they are engaged and, part of something bigger than themselves. To get yourself elected to parliament it's no small feat. There are only 3,000 Canadians or so that have ever experienced that before. And so to get to Ottawa and then to be, treated, like a child, this is the policy today. This is what we're doing. These are speaking points. You're not allowed to do this, not allowed to do that. That's a recipe for division and unrest. And so unless we are engaged and listening to each other, and trying to find the common ground, we're not always going to agree. I've always said that unity doesn't mean uniformity, but we have to listen to each other. And I can give you examples of members of our caucus today who, we vote very, very differently. And yet they have told me that, they may have endorsed another candidate, but I'm number 2 on their ballot. And I've asked them directly, why is that? You and I vote very differently. I said, well, because you've always respected me and we can have a conversation about things that we don't agree on, but we find areas where we do agree and we move forward. And that's what's missing. And I think that's missing in our broader movement. I think that there is an element of our society that doesn't trust our institutions. And I think it's important for Conservatives to not just fan the flames of that distrust, but to do what we've always done, to build up those institutions, make them more transparent, make them more effective. And I think that, Conservatives have always done that. And we need to get back to doing that.
I want to ask you a final question. And I really appreciate your taking the time to come here. And that's sort of, if you had to you gave us a very nice, actually, opening set of remarks about the things that that were kind of driving you. But if you had to sort of leave us with a sense of what Scott Aitchison's foreign policy is in a couple of sentences, what would it be?
It would come down to open engagement with reliable investments to back up our words.
It's pretty succinct. Thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.